Another key piece that's going to be important of note is when we're talking about force, you'll notice that I didn't use any of the terms like speed. I didn't say fast. I didn't use the words get into your legs, any of those phrases. I do this on purpose because those are just phrases. What we have to start to understand and focus more on is positions. Do we teach our athletes to be able to be in position where the word fast can be used to describe their motion? Those words are just descriptions of motion. They do not give the athlete instruction. In order to do something fast, you have to be able to do what the noun of what you're describing fast is 100 out of 100 times. So if I ask someone to squat and then they say squat faster, they know exactly how to perform that pattern faster because they know the pattern. A pitch, a kid could generally throw 5 pitches and they could all be fastballs and it could look 5 different ways. So when you tell someone to be faster, be more explosive, that's almost sometimes hurting them more than it is helping them, because if they can't consistently be in the positions to access power or contractions of their muscles, they have no idea how to execute fast or more explosive. They are not in control of which of those 5 different patterns they're going to choose to be fast or explosive. Now, another piece of that is when it comes to when you tell someone that, or they innately kind of try to do that, we're going to watch this video above and you're going to see it as a mover who, like if you just watch their stance, everything is aggressive, everything is fast, so to say, about their start. Okay, and then if we switch that, we're going to look at this young lady. Very different motions in their start. What you see in the difference between the two, and sometimes a lot of this is innate, this is what you'd say is athleticism. When you ask someone to be faster, they will subconsciously know that it's not about being aggressive or just looking faster or just trying harder. It's about, am I getting in a position to express myself better? And we've already gone over the 2 differences of the squat and hinge pattern, but that's an important thing to understand. Just because you create a lot of motion in the beginning or it looks aggressive, that's not going to equal any of our goals in terms of using the laws of physics and the math to create a greater impact when we're landing, which ultimately gives us an ability to command and throw harder. Below is an example of why these 2 things run into each other in terms of being problematic. You're going to see what's a softer landing. So we're going to describe that as someone being more patient, getting deeper, bends at their hips and knees, and not because they're necessarily trying to, but because they understand that a max output, you want contraction of the muscles and you have more patience because power expresses itself through position and time, not to just speed. So you're going to see that once they hit the ground, there's a deep hip and knee bend. And so now once they leave the ground, I want you to look at the height of their feet. They're going to get pretty much over the box. And then the time that they're in the air is also increased. So once they land, what I want you to notice if we zoom in on the graph is there is a definite increase in that manner. So when I've landed with more impact. If we look at the time reference, there is about, I'd say, almost 3/4 of a second that time is spent in the air. So we can look at this as that's their height. That's the distance they traveled before they hit the ground. Now, that's what we see here in the above, where we see, and we talked about the keeping the hinge and then acceleration happening here where it matters most. So now when we go back to the other young lady, what we talked about, they're trying to be fast as they can off the rubber. So there's less knee bend, they're more stiff at the foot and ankle. And while stiffness is required, and in all actuality, they're trying to be stiff at the ankle, but if you watch, there's more dorsiflexion happening in both feet than was ever present. And the bad part about it is they're dorsiflexing because they're trying to be stiff. So it's important, like when you're using that word or when you hear that phrase, like we want to have stiff ankles. Most of the time, I'd say about 90% of people who discuss that as a pitching coach or in reference to that doesn't understand these concepts overall. They've just heard that that's a good quality to have. When and how it should happen is the most important aspect. So now we're going to look at that same person and they're going to consciously try to hit the floor with stiffness and then do the same thing, jump. And this is very similar. Boom, there's little bend in the hips and knees. You'll notice that there's a large impulse, which is the initial moment they hit the ground, and then they jump. Two things are very clear just watching the video. One, they don't get nearly as high. And then two, when they impact the ground again, there is a huge drop in force. Okay, if we look at that line, sure, you did a lot of work early, but like we've talked about, in order to throw harder, we calculate force at landing. So it doesn't matter that you had a large impulse or a large force in the beginning of your pitch. What happened when you landed? Now we're under 4 times our body weight. If we want to draw that direct line right there, so like 3.5, maybe 3.6 times their body weight. Notice they didn't jump as high. So from a stride length perspective, now their stride is shorter, meaning their effective velocity, we're not increasing that. Effective velocity, we'll talk about that more in its two details. One is what it feels like to the catcher when you throw in different parts of the zone. And then the other part is the reaction time. 60 miles an hour from 35 feet is different from 60 miles an hour at 37 feet. So when we're looking at stride length, that's something down the road we'll talk about to take into account. So now let's go back to this. This was the soft landing. I know I'm a little higher, but just for reference. Now we're at closer to 5 times our body weight. And remember, that if he weighs 100 pounds, that could be 75 pounds times his acceleration. So it's multiplication. So there's an exponential amount more force that we're going to get to see. The other part is, like I said, we're jumping higher. So that also means our stride is longer, meaning we're letting that velocity go from closer to the catcher. So this is an important note to understand when we're discussing the laws of physics within the pitch, and then also understanding where stiffness is good and where stiffness is bad. What you want to have in terms of stiffness is in our soft landing. When your knees and hips bend, you don't want to have large collapses of dorsiflexion. So if you look at his knees, hips, and then ankle, when we go to the stiff landing, he's in about the same position at the foot and ankle. So both are stiff. The stiffness is required in order for energy to transfer up the chain, but you can't largely see what that difference is. So if you're looking for stiff ankles and hips in those certain things, understand that you have to have a very keen eye to be able to detect that. And I'm going to tell you that I can't do it 100% of the time. Most of the world-class trainers I've been around can't do it. We'd have to get on motion capture and get the data to really tell. So if you're just fixated on, you got to have stiffness and ankle stiffness, don't look for it. You're not going to be able to. It's better to understand that I'm not trying to be stiff and then equate that to fast, because that's not encompassing the goal I'm looking for in my pitch.